So I want to talk to you guys about intimacy. You know, intimacy is something that's completely, totally perverted and twisted in the world that we live in and amongst our natural man. The original definition of intimacy is a close familiarity or fellowship, a nearness in friendship, a loving, a relational bond. We don't know that because when we go to the mall, we see intimate apparel. We see people talking about intimacy, and we know that they're referring to sexually. Intimacy is not sexual. Intimacy is actually what men were created to share one with another. God shared intimacy with Adam. David and Jonathan were intimate. They were not lovers, but they were intimate. Jesus was intimate with all of his apostles. The Lord wants you to have an intimate relationship with him. The reason a lot of people don't want to have an intimate relationship with the Lord is because they think intimacy is sexual. And so they don't want to have a sexual relationship with the Lord. So intimacy is not sexual. Intimacy is part of each one of our characters, each of our nature. It's who and what we are, what we were created to share one with another. With that said, I'm going to give you a quick testimony of me, of my life, what I've endured and what I've learned. Because I've learned about intimacy ever since I was a little boy and didn't even know I was learning. You see, my father took his life. He committed suicide just before I was born. So I was raised without a father, and I had this natural desire to share intimacy with a man. I had a natural desire for male affirmation, male confirmation. Just so happened that there were men that took advantage of that desire. There were men who came into my life and molested me. There were men who hurt me. There were family friends, there were neighbors. So even though it was negative attention, anybody with children knows that attention is attention with children. Don't matter if it's negative or positive, if they're receiving it, they will associate something good with it. I associated that negative behavior with love. I thought that that was what love was. So I don't know where a lot of you were when you were 8 years old, 9 years old, probably playing on the playground, getting into softball, cheerleading, whatever. Well, me, I was cutting school to go hang out in a public bathroom to wait for that dirty old man to come along. And young or old, they always came along because I wanted to be loved. By the age of 10, 11, I was into drugs, I was into alcohol. I was sneaking out at night and sneaking back in the morning, or sometimes just walking in the front door and saying, yeah, I was out all night. Punish me, beat me, hurt me, because I didn't care. By the age of 13, I overdosed on pills. Well, I was the baby of 4. My mom was at her wit's end. She didn't know what to do with me, so we went from New Jersey to Philadelphia, because that was her only option. And for me, it was out of the frying pan into the fire, because the city of brotherly love, and boy was it ever. My mom, who wasn't a Christian, she didn't even know who Jesus was. But she knew by her natural instinct, her nurturing nature, to look at me and say, listen, I had a son. I didn't have a daughter. You're not going to act like this. You're not going to dress like that. You're not going to participate in that stuff. If that's what you want to do, there's the door. And at 14 years old, I walked out the door. At 14 years old, I lived on the streets of Philadelphia. 14 years old, I was prostituting my body. At 14 years old, I was buying female hormones in the nightclub and on the corner like people buy drugs. At 14 years old, I was injecting myself with these hormones that I was buying on the street corner. At 14 years old, I was HIV positive. Excuse me. I was recruited into that movement, by the way. What I now call molested. The LGBT movement calls recruited. They recruit. Which should give you a little inkling of why they are in your schools and why they are in your 4-H, why they're in your Boy Scouts. And you proof positive, if you want to know the proof, go anywhere this week, go anywhere where children gather, and there's a rainbow there. Now go down to the old folks' home, and there ain't no rainbows there because they don't want your old folks. They want your children and they want your grandchildren. So at 14 years old, I'm stuck out on the streets. I'm pretty ticked off because how dare my mom not accept my fantasy that I'm a woman. How dare she give me an ultimatum? And so now I'm HIV positive, and I go to my peers, the older people from the LGBT, and I said, well, what am I going to do? I'm HIV positive, y'all. They said, so are we. The blankety blank that gave it to you didn't care, so don't you care who you give it to. Matter of fact, take out as many as you can. And so that's what I set out to do from the age of 14. I set out to take out as many as I could. And we're talking thousands in my lifetime. I was in and out of jail as a juvenile, in and out of county jail as an adult, and then in and out of prison. My last time in prison, I went to prison looking like that. Told them my name was David, but they still marked me down as a female because they were just as confused as I was. So this is what I went to prison looking like. And I want you to understand that there's nothing glorifying about these pictures. People come up, oh, you were so pretty. No, I wasn't. I show this because I want people to know that there's no such thing as too far gone. There's no such thing as cross the line. There's no such thing as too far gone. Because that was me. How did I get sucked in to that movement? Because of the great deception, the great lie, the great fallacy, the indoctrination, the natural man that didn't and couldn't receive things of the Spirit. My spiritual makeup from the Lord God Almighty was for me to desire intimacy with another man. But because the natural man couldn't understand that, I identified that desire for intimacy, I identified it as an attraction. I thought I was attracted to other men. So with attraction comes romantic and or sexual activity. I never knew that I could be intimate with another man and not engage in sexual activity. I couldn't even fathom that idea. So I'm in prison, and I look like that, except I didn't have no hair because they shave your head. And I'm standing there, and I'm on the rec yard in prison, and as if looking like that in a men's prison isn't big enough, I'm cheerleading on the rec yard. And this correctional officer is looking at me, and he's shaking his head, and I'm thinking, oh, he's going to be a problem. And he says, you, come here. And I bounce up to him. I said, what? He said, what's your name? I said, Paige. He said, no. He said, that's a girl's name. He said, what's the name your mama gave you? I said, David. He said, well, David, do you know that God didn't create you to be that way? I was offended. I was hurt. I was angry. I'm like, this dude's hating on me. He's drinking haterade. What am I going to do? Because I don't want to talk to him. And I said, arrogantly and pridefully, I said, of course he did. Look at me. I do this very well. He said, no. He said, he didn't even intend for you to look like that. And I'm going to tell you this every day because I can. And he could. And he did. Every day that man told me, and he knew I didn't want to hear it. It didn't matter if he hurt my feelings or if I was offended. He said, God didn't create you to be that way. And it got to be a few weeks where I would see him and I'd say, God didn't create me to be this way, and keep walking. But then I started looking for him. We called him Bishop. I don't even know what his name was. We all called him Bishop. Even his fellow correctional officers called him Bishop. It got to the point where I started looking for Bishop. Bishop would be coming down the catwalk. We'd be in my cell hanging out. Everybody else say, oh, here comes Bishop. I'm out of here. I was like, y'all go ahead. I want to talk to this man. Because I was 34, 35 at the time. And it took me 30-something years to find out what love truly was. That love from a man that loved me so much, he didn't care if he offended me. Because the truth is offensive to those who don't live in the truth. The truth sounds like hate to those who hate the truth. So I would spend time talking to this man. I'd go looking for him. Where's Bishop? He's out on this side. Oh, I'm going to talk to Bishop. That man stood before me, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that that man loved me, true and pure. That he loved me enough to pour out everything he had been given freely. He wanted to pour it out into me. That's love. Love is being prepared to love somebody to life and let them walk out of your life rather than love them to death and not want to offend them and love them straight to hell. And he loved me to life. So when I got out of prison, I can't sit here and tell you I became this man of God and started running around and preaching the Bible and all that, because I didn't. Like a dog, I returned to my vomit. Had a couple sins, added selling dope and gambling and even more things. I won't even give the enemy the glory to talk about. But I'll tell you what, there was a difference. Because I no longer felt comfortable dressing like a woman. And it's kind of awkward for a man with breasts to not want to get dressed up as a woman, because now he's just a man with breasts. But that's when I found out that in that movement, I was always concerned with my appearance, my outer appearance, and how I looked. But in that movement, it doesn't really matter what you look like, because perversion doesn't care what you look like, what you smell like. I engaged in activity with homeless people under a boardwalk just because I had an addiction, a stronghold to want to engage in that type of activity. In 2008, because of all the hormones that I had taken, all the drugs that I had done, all the alcohol, I was stricken down with full-fledged osteoporosis. And for any of you that don't know what that is, it's an elderly woman's disease, mostly. I had osteoporosis. I had to start using a cane, and then I had to use a walker because I couldn't even stand up straight, and I was stuck hunched over all day, every day, dragging myself around on a walker. I was in excruciating pain. I was on Oxycontin, oxycodone, hydrocodone, street drugs, anything I could get my hands on. Anything the doctors would give me and anything I could buy on the streets was everything that I was putting into my body. But even though I was in so much pain, even though I had to drag myself around on a walker, that didn't stop me from wanting to satisfy the lust of my flesh. That didn't stop me from dragging myself to the nightclub and to the sex parties, or dragging myself down to the corner to hang out and hope that I got lucky. Until 2009, when the Lord struck me down with full-blown AIDS. And I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. I'm not saying that AIDS is a punishment from God. There's a lot of people out there that believe that. But it's not a punishment from God. AIDS just happened to be my reward for the choices that I made. See, a lot of we think that rewards are only good things. We think, you go shopping, you get a 15% off reward. Oh, I got a reward. Well, I got a reward too. My reward was evil. Rewards are good or evil for your actions. So, AIDS, herpes, syphilis, all kinds of other STDs and all kinds of other illnesses, they were all my reward for the choices I made in my life. So 2009, I got full-blown AIDS. I have infections in my brain, infections in my blood. I'm having several mini strokes a day from the infections in my brain. The infections were trying to fight their way out of my body by way of boils. And I don't mean I had a bump here and there. I mean I had Job boils. Boils all over my body filling up. And they're very painful. And the doctor said, well, David, you don't have an immune system. It's gone. Your T cells, that's how they measure it, is 0. Nothing. So you don't even have to take the medicine anymore. Your viral load is through the roof. We've never even seen a viral load as high as yours in our office. So you will not survive. You don't have to take the HIV medicine anymore. There's no hope. We're going to put hospice in place. We're going to put a hospital bed in your room. We're going to make you comfortable so you can die. And they did. Hospice came in and put all these nice little plastic furniture so you can die in peace kind of thing. And I laid in bed waiting to die. But I knew two things as I laid in that hospital bed. I knew that I was afraid to die. And I knew that I was afraid to die because I didn't want to go to hell. And at that moment, I knew that hell was what I deserved. I knew that hell was my reward for all the choices I had made in my life. I knew that hell was where I was heading. But God. So I had a Bible that was sitting on my nightstand, and it was a Bible that someone sent me when I was in prison, and all I ever read was Psalms. Well, and I didn't even read Psalms. I read a couple paragraphs in Psalms, and it wasn't very inspirational, so I threw it in my footlocker, and that was that. So this Bible, when I came home from prison, I put it on my nightstand. I used it as a coaster. I still have the Bible. It still has the rings all over it from the drinks. And I picked up that Bible because I didn't want to go to hell. And I opened up the Bible, and the very first verse I ever read was Romans 1:27. It said, men burning in lust for one another, giving up the natural use of the woman. See, I already knew I was living sinfully. I would never admit it. I would cry and tell you how this is just who I am and what I am, and you please accept me. But I knew that what I was doing was wrong. I have physically hurt people just to show them how happy I was. And once I read that, giving up the natural use of the woman, told me that not only was I living sinfully, but I was living unnaturally. I understood at that moment that I was in direct opposition to God's very intention for creating me. Not just for his creation and for who and what he created me to be, but just for the very thought he had of creating me. I was opposing that my entire life. And it's not a place you want to end up. And so I started diving into the Word. I tried to absorb all that I could, and I started talking to Him and confessing to Him and repenting and giving it all to Him, and I did so for weeks. And people would come to see me, and I'd say, don't ever love anybody to death again. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, all this time I've been living like this, and you couldn't even tell me it was wrong. They didn't really know it was wrong because they were just as lost as I was. But my mother knew that it was wrong. And she didn't have to be a Christian to know that she didn't want that darkness to envelop her child. She knew that it was unnatural. And she didn't even have to be a Christian. Atheists know that it's wrong. I had a group of atheists come up to me outside of SCOTUS in D.C. and say, we don't believe in your God, but we know that killing unborn babies is not good, and we know that homosexuality is unnatural. So they believe in something, and they stood with me that day. I ended up waking up one morning, and I was really confused, as if I wasn't confused for 30 years before that. But I was really confused because I was in excruciating pain. But I had joy in my heart. I was in tremendous pain, but I had peace. For the first time in my life, I knew what rest meant. And I felt like I was at rest, even in the pain. The pain didn't matter. And at that moment, I knew that I was no longer afraid to die because I knew I wasn't going to hell. I said, okay, Lord, I'm ready. Take me. Take me home. I don't want to be here. I don't want to look like this. I don't want to live like this. I said, but I have one request. That through my death, you would be glorified. Now, selfishly, I was thinking of my mama, but I said, at least let one person come to know you through my death. So from that moment on, I just started getting better. I started getting up out of bed and standing up and using just a cane and standing up straight, and then no cane and walking around and getting around and doing better. And then the HIV went undetectable. And my nurse practitioner said, David, the doctor's not coming in this office because he cannot tell you any scientific explanation for what's going on with you. She said, this is a medical miracle. Another doctor that I went to said, there's been a mistake. There's no way all these tests in your file can be yours. These tests are of an old woman. Your bone density is better than that of a man your age should be. I said, well, that's God. She said, no, that's a mistake. I said, no, the mistake was me coming to see you when I've already seen the great physician. Amen. Amen. And it takes me back to intimacy. And even as I was, after I was rescued, see, I wasn't called out, I was rescued. God reached down into the cesspools of this world and he yanked me out. I didn't find Jesus because he wasn't lost. Jesus found me and yanked me out. Okay? So now, and then I started learning about intimacy, and I'm telling people, I go out and do street preaching, and I'm telling homosexuals, it's unnatural. You can't feel like this. That's unnatural. The church has been telling homosexuals, it's unnatural. And that's a lie from the pit of hell. God places in each one of us a desire to share intimacy one with another. It's how our minds are deciphering it and how we're acting upon it that's unnatural. But that feeling is very natural. And any young people here today, or anybody with young people, especially in their lives, that have those feelings And you're telling them, no, well, it's just unnatural, honey. You need to stop. Because I know what they're feeling. And I know that that feeling is not unnatural. Because even for the first 7 years of my walk as a man of God, I would still go to prayer and say, Lord, would you please remove this attraction to men? And God said a whole lot of things, and all I ever heard was, oh, my grace is sufficient for you. But what he was saying is, have you not learned anything? Have you not learned? Look at your life. Go back and look at your entire life. Have you not learned anything? You don't have an attraction for men because I didn't put it in your makeup. I didn't put it in your character. You have a desire to be intimate with other men because that's what I put in your character. That's who you were created to be. See, the only way for the church to be strong is for the men to share intimacy one with another and be strong. Right now, you look up intimacy and it says, an intimate act, especially sexual intercourse. Not an intimate act hyphen sexual intercourse, but especially sexual intercourse. The enemy wants to taint everything he can. He perverts everything. See, we're born into sin and shaped in iniquity, but iniquity means perversion. So we're a room full of perverts because we're all shaped in perversion. Intimacy actually comes from the Latin word intimare, which means impress or make familiar. Comes from the Latin intimus, meaning inmost. Intimacy is a close, familiar, love bond kind of connection. You see, if I can't lay my head on my brother's chest and weep, and he can't at the same time wrap his arms around me and embrace me, then there's something wrong with me and him. Intimacy, into me see. That's how, if I can see into every one of my brothers, I can be intimate with them. I had a young man, I met a lot of young men and women at the homosexual pride parade. And one of the young men, I would go and take him out to lunch a couple times a week, and we'd go to the park and we'd walk around, we'd talk, and we'd sit at the bench and we'd hug, and he'd cry, and I'd hold him, and I'd talk, and I'd share, and I'd cry. And he had no problem holding me. And he couldn't go home because he wanted to be a homosexual, and his mom and his dad said, nope, not under my roof. And he called me up a couple months ago and he says, I'm ready to go home. I said, you know what that means, right? He says, I'm ready to renounce homosexuality.
Praise God.
As I was driving him home, I said, what happened? And he said, you happened. I said, no, not me, Jesus. He said, no, David, you. He said, you showed me that I could have a personal, close, compassionate relationship with another man, and it didn't have to be sexual. The Lord started really dealing with me at that point. It felt like he smacked me upside the back of my head. Because see, my entire life I was ultra feminine. I mean, I didn't look like those pictures and walk and talk like this, you know, because that would have defeated the whole purpose. Although, when I walked through a crowd and they didn't know what I was, I made sure they all knew. Because I'd look at them and say, I'm a man. And they say, yeah, right. I say, no, really, I'm a man. Because it's all about being the spectacle. It's all about being the center of attention. You always know who's transgender or who's homosexual because they're crying out for attention in their words, in their deeds, and in their actions. And so what I started realizing as Jesus taught me how to be a man through the word. He taught me what masculinity was. And it wasn't about hoorah football and all that good stuff. That's macho. But what he taught me was being masculine as a man of God to represent Jesus Christ was to do so in word, in deed, and in action. And so, Coach Dave said something to me a couple weeks ago that had me thinking all night and all day the next day. He said, there's no homosexuality in a football locker room. He says, because those men are intimate and they're masculine. Now, they're not masculine because they play football. But because they're masculine, they have that desire to be in groups of men, around other men, and being intimate with other men. So in a football locker room, they can be walking around with a towel on or nothing on, sit next to each other, put their head on each other's shoulder. They can cry, they can laugh, they can love each other and not be sexual. And they don't have a problem with that because they're masculine. And their masculinity gives them security to be intimate with other men. See, intimacy has been twisted already by the enemy. It's been perverted. And that's why masculinity is under attack right now. Because all of the boys are being emasculated. And it is a spiritual attack, but it's also a natural attack. A lot of people don't even know things like what BPA is. And BPA is a synthetic plastic. It's a synthetic estrogen that they were lining cans of food with for 15 years before anybody knew what BPA was. So it's a plan to feminize or emasculate, because what other way can the enemy get in but to have the men who are supposed to be masculine and bonded together in intimacy to be softened and weakened and emasculated and womanized. Men that are masculine have a security about themselves that allows them to be intimate with other men without even thinking about it being sexual. I had no problem engaging in sexual activity when I was feminine. But since Jesus taught me how to be a man, I have a problem with engaging in sexual activity with other men, because I wasn't created to do that. Oh, how did that get in there? Wow. Skinny jeans make you look manly, said no one ever. It's not about the culture. There's a lot of ex-homosexual ministries out there right now that have no power in them. They have no power because they're still in bondage. They may not be engaging in homosexuality anymore, praise the Lord. But they're still wearing lavender skinny jeans, having blue streaks in their hair, getting up talking about, my wife is fabulous, y'all. And there's something wrong with that. Because if I don't see Jesus doing it, I sure as heck better not be doing it. I don't see Jesus prancing down the street in some blue skinny jeans, lavender or whatever skinny jeans. The attack on masculinity is because the very image that we bear is what's under attack as men. And I keep specifying men because from what I see in Scripture, women are victims. They're casualties of this war. If men would be men, women wouldn't have a problem getting right. In Luke 19:10, Jesus says, for the Son of Man is come to seek and to save, to restore that which was lost. What is that? The relationship that we were created to have. The image that we were created to bear. That is what is under attack. Relationship of mankind and all of creation with God. Sin entered the world through one man, Adam. And then the male gender lost the relationship first. That's passed to us. And the reason that the majority of men have a problem with relationships is because man lost it first. Because that was what was under attack first. The enemy has... God shared an intimate relationship with Adam in the Garden of Eden. That was under attack. And it worked because God said, you got to go. Get out of my garden. Masculinity and intimacy are intertwined in our nature. They're just part of our character, part of our makeup. We can't change them, just like we can't change our DNA. No matter what medication you take, no matter what surgery you take, you will always be the gender you were created to be. Because your gender is not determined by the doctor. And here's one that might really freak you out, but your gender is not determined by your genitalia. Your gender is determined by your DNA, which then determines your genitalia. So when your kids and your grandchildren are going to school, these are the definitions and what they're learning in school. They're learning that gender is assigned at birth. It's assigned by the medical team, by the doctors. So what they're teaching them is that God doesn't determine your gender, because the doctor has to assign you your gender. But even that's not good enough, because now, even though the doctor says what you are, now you don't even have to be that, because I think it's New York that is leaving, they're called theybies, Theybies, that's the nickname for them, theybies, that the birth certificate will be left blank, and the child will get to choose what gender they are when they're old enough to make that decision. So they're learning that transsexual is a person who is transsexual, is physically or hormonally transitioned to another gender. Well, you cannot transition to another gender. It's impossible. Bruce Jenner, when he dies and they dig him up in 200 years and do a DNA test, they found the bones of a man, not of Caitlin, of Bruce. So, and this side of the screen is what they are teaching in the schools. And then this side is just my 2 cents. So they're also teaching pansexual. A person who is pansexual is attracted to people, regardless of their gender. People have a natural, God-given desire to share intimacy with other people. But they're learning early on that it's not an intimate desire, that it's a romantic attraction. Now, when I saw this, and I didn't add this bottom part, but when I first heard somebody say that they were pansexual, I made a joke and I said, well, what are you, attracted to pans? But then I see in their definition, they say pansexual people are not attracted to pans. So they're like half expecting it. Gray asexual. Now I was in a high school class talking to a group of high schoolers, seniors, and one of them said, well, what about asexual? I said, well, what about it? Worms are asexual. Are you a worm? We can't be asexual. So a gray asexual is a person who very rarely experiences sexual attraction to any gender. Polysexual. A person who is polysexual is attracted to more than 2 genders, but not all genders. There are only 2 genders, and that's all there is. But just in the definition of the word, they're teaching these children that there are more than two genders. Just in the definition. They don't have to even say it to them. All they have to do is tell them the definition of polysexual, and because they said it's a word, it's a word. Bisexual. Please hear me on this one, because I speak to Christians who tell me they were bisexual, or their daughter is bisexual. There is no such thing as bisexual. None. If a man lays with another man, it doesn't matter if one of those men thinks he shoulda, coulda, woulda, wanna be, can pay to be, or dress up like the opposite sex, he's still a man. They are guilty of the sin of homosexuality. If a man lays with a woman outside of wedlock, he's guilty of the sin of fornication and in some cases adultery. So there is no such thing as bisexual. If we continue using their words and we continue saying bisexual like it is a thing, then that entails that it is an orientation, which means that homosexuality has to be an orientation as well, which means that God is wrong, the Bible is false, and all of us can go home because we're wasting our time right here, right now.
Preach it.
Intersex. I've never even heard of intersex. And one of the kids was like, well, what about intersex? And I was like, well, let me get off of this topic until I find out what this even means. So, a person who is intersex was born as neither entirely male or female. Big misconception here. People say, well, what about hermaphrodites? Hermaphrodites are born with a birth defect. Okay? They are not born two sexes. Nobody has ever been born male and female, ever, in history. No hermaphrodite has ever been born with two complete, total, and functioning sex organs. So God never makes a mistake. We've made a lot of mistakes. We've put a lot of crap into our food. We've taken a lot of chemicals into our bodies. We are responsible for the birth defects that happen. But never has a hermaphrodite been born where the doctor could say, well, do you want this to be a little boy or a little girl? Because there's only one of those sex organs that is complete, total, and functionable. Not only that, all they have to do is do a DNA test, and they'll know whether that baby is a male or a female. And that'll be the organ they can save. Demisexual. Not dummy sexual. Demisexual. So demisexual is a person who only experiences sexual attraction once a strong emotional bond has formed. Another way of deceiving your child or your grandchild is to say, see, a lot of people recognize that desire they have for intimacy as just that, a desire for a strong bond. But right here in this definition, they're telling you that if you experience this strong emotional bond, that it must become sexual because it's an attraction. Sexuality and romantic orientation are different. A person can be romantically attracted to people yet rarely feel sexual attraction for them. And so in other words, instead of just saying, look, these feelings you have are natural. You have a desire to be intimate with another man, and that's all right. But now we need to teach you what intimacy means. And that's what they need to learn. They need to learn what intimacy is, because this indoctrination makes your children and your grandchildren think that if they desire a strong emotional bond, that it has to become romantic and sexual. And that's a lie from the pit of hell. Non-binary. A person who is non-binary identifies as a gender that is not male or female. we don't even have to go there. Because I'm sure this crowd knows that there is nothing outside of male or female. We have a medical doctor right back there, and I'm sure he could tell you there's nothing other than male or female. There are only two genders. And of course, and this is what they're teaching the children, and I know because I have a lot of parents telling me that their kids are coming home using words like Z and Zer. And they're saying, what is that? And they're like, oh, those are the new pronouns we have to use for Tommy because he's not Tommy anymore. He's they. He's not he or she, he's they or Z or Zer. Those are the pronouns that they're told they have to use for these other children. There are some preschool classes right now in our nation that the kids go to school and they get to choose a bracelet on the wall for who they are that day. They can be anybody they want that day. Walmart in Secaucus, New Jersey just put out a little promo ad on Facebook of their employee, a man that's named Bryn Lee, that self-identifies as a unicorn. A unicorn. See, we know it's crazy. We know it's stupid. We laugh. But they put the ad out there. They let him work there dressing like a woman, calling himself a unicorn. Instead of saying, well, no, you need help. You need Jesus. Polyamory. A polyamorous relationship involves more than two people with fully consensual romantic involvement. See, one of the agenda items of the LGBT movement ever since the 60s has been to destroy the natural family unit. Right. The one man, one woman. Always. And so they've been fighting for marriages to consist of more than one man and one woman. They've also been fighting to have the legal age of sexual consent dropped to 11. Gender fluid. I don't know why anybody would send their child to public school. However, I know that some people have to. I do know that, and I'm not bashing you if you have to send your kids to public school. But what I'm saying is, if they're raised in a Christian home and they come home from school and they say, well, today we learned about evolution, and you say, no, Johnny, it's all about creation. And then tomorrow they come home and say, well, today we learned all about the wonderful Islam. And you say, no, it's all about Christianity. And then the next day they're going to come home and say they're gender fluid. They look up, why are they not going to believe their teachers? Because you're sending them there to learn. And they're going to learn what they're being taught. So if you're gender fluid, you can change your gender that you identify as throughout the gender spectrum. I don't even know what that means. I've read the gender spectrum numerous times on this website, Glisten, Glsen, and they've been in your schools since 1980. Queer. Queer is an umbrella term for all sexual and gender minorities. However, if a person is not straight and or cisgender, they can identify as queer. Although queer was once used as derogatory, it's being reclaimed. The word was never theirs. I'm gay, okay? I wasn't gay when I was a homosexual, and I sure wasn't gay when I was transgender, because I was miserable. I'm gay now because Jesus, he makes me gay. How many men have you ever heard say, Jesus made me gay? But Jesus made me gay, because gay means happy, it means frolicsome, it means joyful. And that's what Jesus does, he makes us joyful. So, queer, it was never their word. Queer, original definition, odd. So, go figure. Gender queer. Here's another umbrella term for people who identify as genders outside the binary. One young man said to me, well, I'm cisgender. I said, well, what is that? He says, well, it's because the doctor he assigned me male at birth, and I identify as a male. I'm like, he assigned you male at birth because you're a male. You identify as a male because you're a male. The doctor or you didn't have anything to do with that. That's all God. So, intimacy. It's so detrimental that men of God learn that you must be for your children, for your grandchildren, for your neighbors' children, for your nephews and your nieces, that you must learn how to be intimate with one another. You must learn about transparency as well. You see, we don't confess in confidence. We must confess to be free. We confess to be transparent. So when I have a recovery group that I speak to, and I tell them boys, or them men, that look, I don't want to hear about how you got the drugs and the drugs that you did and the alcohol that you drank or the terms you did or how much prison time you did or what you did it for. I want you to talk about to the group what you did to get the drugs. How about what you did while you were on the drugs? See, because a lot of those men are guilty of the sin of homosexuality, but they would never talk about it. And because they wouldn't be transparent about it and talk about it, it's residue. It stays with them, and eventually it'll permeate them and draw them back to their sin, because they keep it hidden and locked up, like they can't talk about it. Amen. And they have to talk about it, because once you speak it, you release its power over you. Not only that, but you're also giving somebody else the inclination to want to speak what they've done. See, I did a 6-week experiment with a men's group, and for the first 5 weeks, I started the group and I said, yeah, I'm guilty of homosexuality, drugs, alcohol, yeah, that's all I want to share. And as it went around, they all shared the same basic stuff. Anger issues, mommy and daddy issues, girlfriend issues, drugs, alcohol, and jail. That was all I heard about. Well, the 6th week, I stood up amongst them men and I said, listen to me. I said, not only was I molested, but I became a molester. I recruited young boys into that movement just the way I was recruited into that movement. They looked at me at that point like, whoa. I said, and I got into all the details of my sexual addictions. When I was done, each one of those men shared something, spoke something they had never spoke before. And it released its hold on them. At the end of that group, when they were hugging and crying, I knew I was done there, because I learned more about intimacy. And I was done there. My mission was accomplished, and I left. But it's detrimental to your children and your grandchildren that you learn how to be intimate. And that you learn that there is freedom from homosexuality, that it's not who they are. No one is... Listen, I had an interaction at a homosexual church. Those words don't even really go together, but that's what they call them. I had an interaction with an apostate church, okay? And the pastor said, well, maybe you were never really gay. And I said, well, duh, neither are you. You see, we're all heterosexual. It's in our makeup. The same way you're male or female is in your DNA, Your orientation, there's only one orientation, and it's heterosexuality. It's built into you. You can't build something into something and then it go off and say, well, I'm not this anymore because I don't feel or think that way. But he said to me, he says, I was born this way, David. And I said, well, how about that? Jesus said, be born again. But this is who I am, David. Jesus said, deny yourself. See, there's such an easy, simple way. We don't have to argue. We don't have to debate. All we have to do is tell them the truth of the Word of God. Jesus said, be born again. Jesus said, deny yourself. If you do those things and you surrender all to Him, guess what? You'll be on the right path.
Amen.
That's it. It's that simple. So I want to thank you guys for letting me ramble on. So God bless you guys. And I will be in the back, and I will be around tomorrow. So if anybody would like to have a meeting tomorrow or to speak or know somebody that needs to speak, then feel free to see me today and make an appointment for tomorrow. God bless you.